You know, what happens when the people running a public company decide they want to buy it for themselves? You'd like to think it's because they have some grand vision, right? A plan for the future, but what if the real reason is that they're just trying to solve their own personal money problems? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. This is the high-stakes drama unfolding at Grindr, where a buyout offer that looks fantastic on the surface might be hiding a massive crisis.
So, picture this. It's October 24th, 2025, and if you're a minority shareholder in Grindr, you get some news that sounds absolutely fantastic. The guys who already control the company, they just made an offer to buy out everyone else, and they're proposing a massive 51% premium over the stock price. I mean, an offer like that, it's pretty hard to ignore.
And of course, the official story they told sounded just as good. The guy leading the charge, George Zage, he framed it as this huge vote of confidence. He said, "We are strong believers in the long-term outlook for the company. Basically, we believe in Grindr's future. We're not selling to anyone else." You know, it all sounds super reassuring, totally standard stuff. But that's where the official story stops, and where things start to get really interesting. Was this actually a generous offer, an act of faith in the business? Or was there something else going on? Something, a lot more complicated and a lot more troubling happening behind the scenes. Okay, so to really get what's happening here, we have to look at the insiders themselves. We're talking about two key players, George Zage and James Liu. And the single most important thing you need to know about these two is that they are in complete control of Grindr.
Yeah, together, Zage and Liu control over 60% of the stock. And in the world of corporate law, that has a special name. It makes them controllers. What does that mean? It means they have so much power that any shareholder vote is basically a done deal before it even starts. What they want happens. And that power, that control, is absolutely central to this whole story.
But here's the thing. Their actions right before the big offer, they just don't add up. So check out this timeline. On October 9th, Zage makes a big show of public confidence, buying $13 million worth of stock. Okay. Just 4 days later, he and Liu secretly tell the board they want to buy the whole company. Now, this is where it gets really strange. On October 17th, after they sent that secret letter, the chairman, James Liu, suddenly sells $3.3 million of his own stock at a low price. Why? Why would you do that right before an offer you know is about to happen? It makes absolutely no sense.
Let's just put these two trades side by side for a second, because this is so important. You have Zage the believer buying millions in stock, and then you have Liu, his partner in the buyout, selling his stock at almost the exact same low price. I mean, why on earth would the chairman of the company sell his shares for around $13 when he knows his own group is about to offer $18 a share? He literally left a 36% premium on the table. It's completely illogical, unless he had no choice, unless he was forced to sell.
And then, as if that wasn't weird enough, came the next move. Right after the offer went public, the chairman, James Liu, just quits. He resigns. The official press release is super vague, to focus on personal business priorities. But his actual resignation letter, it tells a completely different story. In it, he says he's leaving so he can focus on, wait for it, pursuing the buyout proposal. So yeah, this wasn't a retirement. This was a calculated legal move. He was trying to ditch his responsibilities as chairman while simultaneously trying to take over the very company he was supposed to be leading.
So you've got a weird stock sale, you've got a strategic resignation. What is going on? Well, investigative reporting points to one pretty dramatic answer. This whole buyout plan wasn't about a grand strategy for Grindr. It was a desperate rescue mission for the insider's own personal finances.
And this is really where you see the two stories collide. The official line is all about deep conviction and belief in the business. But what reporters started digging up suggests the real reason, the true catalyst, was a personal financial emergency. Zage and Liu were allegedly getting hammered with margin calls on huge personal loans that were all backed by their Grindr stock.
And this is what's known as a margin call death spiral. Here's how it works. They pledged their Grindr stock to get personal loans, but then the stock price started to tank. When that happened, their lender, Seatown Holdings, got nervous and issued a margin call, basically saying, hey, your collateral isn't worth enough anymore, you need to give us more cash. When they couldn't, the lender just started seizing their shares and selling them off. And what does that do? Of course, it pushes the stock price down even further, which just makes the whole problem worse and worse.
So this brings us to this really interesting concept, the forced LBO, or leveraged buyout. Now, a normal LBO is when you borrow money to buy a company because you think you can grow it and make it better. This is something else entirely. This is a defensive move. The allegation is that these insiders are trying to use Grindr's own money, the company's own balance sheet, to borrow a ton of new debt, not to help Grindr, but to pay off their own personal loans. They're trying to treat the company like it's their own private piggy bank to solve their own crisis.
And we're not talking about a small amount of money here. The number they had in mind is just staggering. Their plan was to load Grindr up with $1 billion in new debt. And that $1 billion would be used to finance the buyout and, oh so conveniently, provide them with the cash they needed to make their personal margin call problems disappear.
Now, as you can probably imagine, a situation this messy, this conflicted, does not go unnoticed. The second this proposal was announced, you had securities law firms just pouncing on it. Because when a controller, someone with that much power, tries to buy out their own company, it automatically triggers the absolute highest level of legal scrutiny that exists in corporate law.
And that legal standard has a name: entire fairness. And you got to understand, this completely flips the script. Normally, if shareholders sue, they have to prove the board did something wrong. But not here. Under entire fairness, the burden of proof is on the insiders, on Zaj and Lou. They have to prove to a court that both the price was fair and the process was fair. It is an incredibly high bar to clear.
So, let's look at the case against them. First up, fair price. This one's pretty straightforward. That big, flashy 51% premium? Well, it's based on a stock price that was artificially low. And a big reason it was so low is because their own lender was forced selling their shares. So they're basically trying to benefit from a crisis that they themselves helped create. On top of that, their $18 offer is way below what most Wall Street analysts think Grindr's actually worth.
Okay, but the case against fair dealing, or a fair process, is maybe even stronger. So the board formed a special committee of so-called independent directors to review the deal. But their independence is already being questioned, since they're the same people who approve moves that help Zarge get over 50% control in the first place. But here's the real kicker, the critical flaw. The deal's missing something called a majority of the minority vote. That's a key protection that would give the regular, powerless shareholders a real say, a veto even. Without that vote, this whole thing looks less like a fair deal and a lot more like a coercive squeeze-out.
So you've got all this pressure, legal scrutiny, a personal debt crisis, angry shareholders. Where does this all go from here? Well, it looks like there are really three main paths this whole situation could take.
All right, path number one, the fair deal. This is where the special committee actually does its job. They reject the $18 offer and they negotiate for a much higher price. And most importantly, they demand that mandatory vote for minority shareholders. Path number two, the unfair deal. Here, the committee just caves. They accept a low offer without the shareholder vote, and the company is immediately buried in costly lawsuits that could drag on for years. And then there's path number three, the collapse. The whole deal just falls apart. But Zaj and Lou still have their debt crisis, which could force them to sell their entire 60% stake to a totally new third-party buyer.
In this whole crazy saga leaves us with a really big question, one that goes way beyond just Grindr. When a company's powerful insiders, the ones with total control, find themselves in deep personal financial trouble, who really is looking out for the average investor? Who's protecting their interests? I guess the answer to that is about to be written by whatever Grindr's special committee decides to do next.